You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. My name is Troy Singer with Ring Digital, here with my good friend Bart Kaler of Kaler Solutions. And today's conversation is strategic renewal in higher ed, planning, innovation, and partnerships for the future. And our guest is Dr. Jamie Caridi. He's the interim president of Bethany College and president of Terra Firma Consulting Services. Dr. Caridi has led institutions through periods of disruption and renewal, helping colleges navigate strategic planning, turnaround, and sustainable growth. With a background spanning in higher ed leadership, corporate relations, and consulting, he's uniquely positioned to speak into the business model changes facing colleges today.
Yeah, Jamie is a great guest. I love the fact that he comes from both higher ed as well as a corporate background. And it reminds me a lot of the conversation we had with Dr. Eric Hogue from Colorado Christian, kind of using a CEO as a president type of thing. And so Jamie really approaches things from a CEO perspective as the way he talks about things, the way he looks at the challenges in higher ed. And I've just had a privilege of working with Dr. Caridi over the last couple of years at our work at Bethany and some of the work with Terra Firma, but I really wanted him to come on because I think he has such a unique perspective to talk about how colleges can really make an impact in the way they need to turn things around and do some renewal, because so many of our institutions are vulnerable and challenged today. So it's a great conversation. I'm excited to share it.
Yeah, Bart, he articulates it very well.
Yeah.
And here is that conversation with Dr. Caridi. Dr. Caridi, we always start by asking our guests to share something interesting or surprising that they may have learned recently. And so today you are in the spotlight.
Well, thank you for that, Troy. I love how you open the show. And I think what I want to share is a riddle back at the two of you, because my kids stumped me on this recently, and my hope is that I stump you. So I'm going to give you three words: facetious, which means jokingly, of course, abstemious, which means practicing restraint, and precious, which means rare. What do all three of those words, facetious, abstemious, and precious, have in common? You're doing great.
The way you presented that to us, the riddle to us.
I'm thinking through the ending, the S. It has to be something clever.
So I didn't get it right either. They are three words of only, I think, less than 10 in the English language that have all five vowels in alphabetical order: A, E, I, O, and U. So I thought I would...
That was my second guess.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Dr. Caridi, now we're going to transfer to our first topic, which is strategic planning for institutional renewal. So at your institution, Bethany, you've been tasked with leading a new strategic plan. Can you set the scene for us of what challenges or opportunities were most pressing when you stepped in a few years ago?
Well, thank you for the question, Troy. I think strategic planning is incredibly important for any organization, and it's even more important for colleges and universities in today's day and age. When I got to Bethany College, what I encountered was an institution that had a lot of headwinds it was facing, which is not unlike a lot of colleges and universities today. And in those instances, this recognition that you need strong alignment between a governing board, a management team, and all the other constituencies that make up the community is really important. Now, what we all know about strategic planning is that lots of organizations do them and then do nothing with them. And it's a very frustrating, it's actually a deflating exercise often. And we've all been part of that. I think we've all had that in our history. So we were neurotic about making sure that's not the case at Bethany. And by the way, Bethany had to execute exceptionally well on its strategic plan. It was running a substantial deficit. It had, a shorter runway like many colleges today. And so we had a lot of issues we had to fix. We had a lot of hard truths that we needed to confront. So terra firma, from which, my consulting practice is built upon, is really building strategy for colleges and universities in a way that is pragmatic. And so colleges for the longest of times would develop these lofty, visionary, unrealistic strategic plans that would go 5, even 10 years out. And terra firma, we just don't believe in that. We believe in 3-year strategic plans that, just given with the pace of change in higher education right now, is going to be substantive enough given the disruption. And so that's what we did. We developed a 3-year strategic plan with 5 pillars, 100 key objectives in it, and we got about the business of knocking them all out. I'm proud to say that we concluded that plan this past spring and completed 85 of the 100 objectives. Wow. We got 14 of the remaining 15 were in progress, late stage, and unbelievably one we did not start. And I wanted to choke all of us on cabinet that we didn't get the one item on the docket started, but it keeps us humble.
There you go. That's great. Well, tell me about that, because I think what you just described is probably, I've got some presidents that are listening that are like, 3 years to do a strategic plan? How does that work? How do you balance that long-term vision of, even if it's a 3-year, with those short-term realities of just, you got the enrollment pressures, and in all transparency, you and I have been on this journey, and I've been a part of what's been going on there at Bethany, and even from when it was you coming in as terra firma. So just transparency for everybody on that. But I also know that there was a lot of challenges in those short-term realities, especially as it related to enrollment pressures and finances. How did you balance that, especially when you were asked to come in as the interim president?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you look at higher education and compare it to the corporate world, higher education takes 12 to 18 months, if not 2 years, to develop a strategic plan. The corporate world takes about 3 months. And so I subscribe to the corporate philosophy. We developed our plan in 3 months because we couldn't spin our wheels fixing to get ready because the challenges were just huge. So we completed a plan within 3 months. By the way, we connected and spoke with over 600 people in that 3-month period. But the entire plan was geared towards dealing with the challenges that were right in front of us. So, and you're right, Bart, for most college presidents and institutional management teams right now, it's institutional enrollment, it's finance. Those tend to be the 2 leading issues. And so they certainly were in our case. We were a $20 million organization running a $5 million deficit. That math don't work, and you don't need to be a math major to know that math don't work. Yeah. So eliminating the deficit and achieving what we call economic equilibrium was incredibly important. And when I say economic equilibrium, that's, yes, eliminating a deficit and balancing a budget, but it's blowing off resources and revenues to invest strategically, to store for a rainy day, to partner with other partners and have something to bring to the table. So economic equilibrium is what really people need to aspire for, and that's more than just balancing a budget.
Yeah, I can testify to that. I saw that happening in the way that you guys were doing that as a team. And I also think, though, that talk a little bit about the role that, especially since finance and enrollment were kind of the 2 areas that really needed the most attention, which are the case at most schools. Certainly that economic equilibrium helps with the finance, but part of the engine that helps with that is enrollment, because 90% of schools in the United States and Canada are focused on, tuition revenue is what balances the books, and they supplement that with donations and things. But talk about how enrollment, and especially enrollment marketing, plays a part in this planning process when you're doing this short-term sprints to be able to get to the goals that you have.
Great question. I'm sure it's been said on your podcast. I know this is, you're in the several hundredth of episodes, so I'm sure the term enrollment cliff has been mentioned at least a couple hundred times.
Yeah.
And while that is true, I think it's a cop-out for higher education leaders, particularly of small private institutions. It's a great external excuse that we can't do anything about, that you can hang your hat on to get out from being held accountable. So we refuse to allow that as an excuse. Bethany College at the time, over the past 10 years, was averaging about 175 new students each year, which was simply not going to get it done. The school was at a low point in enrollment. We knew we needed to not just increase it, but substantially increase it. When we looked at enrollment and specifically enrollment marketing, you first have to define the is. And when we tried to define the is as it related to enrollment marketing, which started with how much money are we even spending in marketing, you would think that would be a simple question to answer. It was like solving the hardest Rubik's Cube on the first time I ever met it, because there was no one enrollment marketing budget. There was no one institutional marketing budget. There's pockets of it here, pockets of it there. So, I turned to a friend who I happen to know, who happened to listen to this podcast, who could help me with that. And so we finally defined how much are we spending on enrollment marketing. And surprise, surprise, we were not spending nearly enough. And by the way, the other thing we learned was where we were spending it was in all the wrong places. So we really had to humble ourselves and educate ourselves on how to truly recruit the student of the 21st century. And that's a humbling experience because, the school was very well set up to recruit the student of the 1970s and the 1980s. Right. But that is not the world we live in anymore. So thankfully, I think we've grown a lot in that regard and have gotten much more sophisticated in our enrollment marketing strategy.
And congratulations on some big recent years of success, and so that's really good testimony to that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, we were very pleased. MSN just recognized our institution as one of the top 50 institutions with the highest application growth. So it's always good to get that external affirmation, and we're celebrating our last 15 years. So very pleased with that.
I would regard those changes that you just described as an innovation. So I would love to talk about innovation as a leadership imperative. You're a certified Lean Six Sigma black belt and a turnaround analyst. So how do those innovation frameworks translate to higher education?
Yeah, well, I think what it does is it makes clear that business principles matter in higher education leadership. And, business principles exclusively without understanding the higher education ecosystem or things like shared governance or the diversity of viewpoints that are always appreciated, welcomed, and necessary in higher education. Business principles by themselves won't get it done. In fact, a lot of business leaders who move into higher education don't succeed for that reason. But what also doesn't work is people who have come up just through the higher education ecosystem and who have never been trained in business or business principles. So, I'm blessed in that I've been given the privilege and opportunity to have both experience. I've spent 25 years in higher education, also had a corporate career with IMG. And so when we founded Terra Firma, we said we're going to assemble a team of higher education experts that truly understand business principles so that we can serve higher educators better. So to that end, that's when I got the Six Sigma certification, as well as became a certified turnaround analyst with the Turnaround Management Association. And what that means is it means looking at the problems that, frankly, we are all confronting right now, defining them, measuring them, making sure you're collecting data, analyzing them, and then kind of entering into this kind of system of continuous process improvement, and doing so in a safe way that allows people to take risks and skin their knees, but acknowledges the fact that you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of good in higher education, but that you have to test everything and keep that which is good. right now. And as we know, higher education has all sorts of orthodoxies in it. Some of those orthodoxies are traditions. Some of those orthodoxies are faith-based sponsoring bodies, all of which are good. And there's other orthodoxies. But some orthodoxies are just bad, and they need to go away. And so that's where these kinds of principles help do just that.
I know one of the things that you have done a lot, not only at Bethany, but some of the other clients that we've shared in the past too, is the idea of being able to create kind of that culture of innovation, being able to introduce innovative business thinking sometimes, just innovative thinking. How do you do that and do that as a leader? Because there's a lot of people that are listening now that might be leaders in a marketing team or leaders in another president or VPs. How do you introduce that culture of innovation while you still are dealing with what you said earlier, that tradition bound, thinking, or, hey, we've always done it this way? Because, I mean, as you and I both know, higher education tends to move slower than the corporate world. And so, it's a little bit of an understatement there. But how do you balance that with the culture of higher education into the culture of innovation?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, there's an old line that says in higher education, you have to get a yes from everybody, but only one no from one constituency in order to stop you in the tracks. And so that is what makes change and innovation hard. One of the things I do when I'm doing executive coaching or strategic planning with higher education leaders is I run them through a very simple exercise. And the exercise is called Start, Stop, Continue. And imagine walking into a conference room, and all the walls are filled with the white paper, and one wall is filled with the word start, another wall is filled with the word stop, and another word is filled with the word continue. And then I will challenge the management team, or in many cases the faculty and staff, to fill those pages with, as they envision their preferred future for the institution, what they should start doing, what they should stop doing, and what they should continue doing.
Oh, yeah.
The start pages get filled voluminously. The continue pages also get filled. Everybody stands and stares at the stop pages like it's a Picasso painting, because higher education is changed by addition, rarely subtraction.
Yeah.
And so in order to lean into innovation, you have to also do so by leaning into what you're going to stop doing, because you have limited human capital, you have limited financial resources, and you have to fund those innovative ideas with human and financial capital. And so it's going to have to come from somewhere else. So I really encourage governing boards and leadership teams to think about both, so that they can achieve ultimately success and take some shots. I encourage every budget that is formulated by any college or university to have a pocket of money that is for strategic initiatives, even if it's undefined. They may not know what those strategic initiatives are. And it doesn't have to be a huge portion of the budget, but for a school that might be $20 million, I encourage them to have $200,000 to $300,000 set aside in the budget every year for strategic initiatives, because there are going to be things that come up, opportunities that come before you, that if you don't act in the moment, then they're going to pass you by. And the last thing I'll say on this is entrepreneurial higher education leaders need to focus on both quick wins and the big ideas, because you need quick wins, frankly, to just keep yourself motivated and to illustrate to the community you're making progress.
Yeah.
But you also can't lose sight on what's going to give you the biggest ROI. And so those sometimes take a little longer. So hopefully that provides you some insight.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And because this is the Higher Ed Marketers podcast, I'm going to talk about marketing for a second, especially as it relates to both innovation. But you made a comment earlier, too, that I want to just kind of circle back to, because when you stop doing things, and sometimes, well, let's just talk about programs for a second. Sometimes programs need sunsetting, and sometimes marketers are the ones to be able to say, there is no market demand for this program anymore, or there is no market demand for that new program that you're dreamt up that you think is so clever, So I think that marketing needs to have a seat at the table to be able to help navigate some of those things, either from market research or from just being able to bring some reality to the conversations. And too many times marketers are left out of that conversation. So that's my soapbox for the moment. But then also just help me understand a little bit about how can marketers play a role in driving innovation? Because I think sometimes marketers bring that entrepreneurial ideation to the table. They bring ideas that I think are creative. Talk about that, about how marketers can help with that innovation.
Yeah, great question. I think, you're right. Marketers do tend to sometimes get boxed out of some of the conversations, but marketers and doing market analysis is critically important on academic programs. What you're going to add, what you're going to restructure, and what you're going to sunset. One of the things that might shock people is, if I put my terra firma hat on for a moment, anytime we do a market analysis, and Bart, I know you've been part of some of these at times, the average small college has 40 to 70 majors. What most people don't know, no matter where we go, no matter what college we look at, usually 5 or 6 majors are driving about 50% of the enrollment. So, there's a moment in time, right, where you have to step back and talk about what have we been carrying that we shouldn't be carrying, and frankly, where are the opportunities to grow. I think from what I have found with marketers is they tend to be on the cutting edge. By the way, I used to work for IMG, a huge, massive marketing firm. And I used to work for a gentleman named Mark Shapiro, who used to run ESPN and Six Flags, and still to this day is running IMG, which is now called Endeavor. And he used to talk about there are, tip of spear, right? There are those who are the innovators. There are early adopters. There's late adopters. There's laggards, right? And so many of us in higher education live in the late adopter or laggard phase of life, which used to be the safe place to live. Conventional wisdom would suggest that's a way to be risk averse. Well, today it's actually the most risky proposition. And what I have found is marketing folk tend to live on the front end of that continuum. They want to be innovators or early adopters. So they can pull a lot of the stagnant thinking forward, and those people can actually help us mitigate risk. They also can help us try some new things, and not everything works, right? One of the funniest stories I tell, we have an enrollment marketer, Anna Weinsdorfer at Bethany. Bart, I think you know who she is.
Yeah, I know Anna.
She's young, she's wicked smart, she's a 20-something. Not that I ever ask a woman their age, but on her first day of working at the college, she decided to cut a really cool Christmas card for the college. It was going to be a digital marketing piece, which was one of our first digital marketing things. And she came in and she said, and she had never met me before, but here I am, I'm the president. She said, "Hey, I'm going to need you to put this Santa hat on." I said, "Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do that." She said, "You're putting the Santa hat on." And so she kind of pushed me around a little bit. But I find that the best marketing executives, and even people that aren't executives but are serious about marketing, they have an element of pushiness to them, professional pushiness, that helps lead leaders into spaces they don't necessarily want to go, into areas of discomfort that on first blush they might not be real comfortable with, but ultimately ends up pushing the institution forward.
Partnerships are a theme across your career, and would like to know what types of partnerships are most promising for colleges today, and maybe taking that, helping us understand that from the president's perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Troy, for the question. I think you're spot on. I mean, we live in a day and age where our competitors now have to be our collaborators. We know that as higher education leaders, in order for us to be more efficient and effective, and for some institutions, frankly, to survive through mergers and affiliations, but also because that's what the marketplace is demanding. When you're chasing foundations or looking at government earmarks and things like that, they want to see that you're not working as the ivory tower in isolation, that you're truly working in relationship with other nonprofits, other educational institutions, with your local government, with your corporations, et cetera. So I would argue it's a mandate right now within higher education, and a very good one for that matter. Now, in the old days, partnerships in higher education meant, a college would go find corporations to have internships with. Like, that is not what I define as a strategic partner. It's a helpful partnership, and we absolutely need those things. But partnerships in the current era have to be material. They have to generate positive cash flow, and the P&L has to work for both entities entering into those partnerships. And they can look very different. Right now, what I believe is colleges, no matter where they are, if you think of every college type in the higher education ecosystem, whether it's small private faith-based, for-profit, public land-grant institutions, etc., every one of them was born and established to serve the needs of their local community or their regional community. And when they take their eyes off that ball, they begin to fail. So what I'm trying to do at Bethany is create what I call a collegiate ecosystem on our campus, where we serve the needs of the community in a variety of different ways. Now, if they're exclusively our programs, that's great. If they're not exclusively our programs, that's fine too. I'll give you one example. Bethany College has never had a allied healthcare program, but we all know it's one of the greatest needs in the labor market and one of the greatest demands among students. Now, even if I had all the money in the world to start nursing, the specialized accreditors would put me in the queue for like 6 years from now because they only take so many at a time. So what I elected to do was connect with one of my competitors, in this case, West Virginia Wesleyan College, who moved from competitor to collaborator. And we are putting their nursing program on our campus so that we can serve the needs of the regional community. We're doing, the business of it is we're doing a rev share model. And students will be able to attend Bethany College, be 4-year student athletes at Bethany, and at the end of 4 years, they'll receive 2 degrees, one from Bethany College and one from West Virginia Wesleyan College. So this is an example of a strategic partnership that's thinking differently. We're creating an ecosystem that serves the needs of the community in a way where all boats rise. So that's where I think higher education, innovation, and entrepreneurship needs to move.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, and I really appreciate that one because I think a lot of schools, and especially you talk about the community colleges, really have a bead on what's the business need around them, what's the workforce need, and so they spend a lot of time on that, and I think that's an opportunity that we have as other types of institutions beyond community colleges, maybe the privates, maybe the public land shares. But I'm speaking specifically to the privates. Is there's a lot of opportunities out there that I don't think that privates lean into as much that could really pay off with enrollment growth, that can really pay off with academic partnerships, whether that's articulation agreements with other schools. I think there's a lot of opportunities in there. So maybe talk through that a little bit. You kind of hinted at that with the partnership on the nursing, but talk about how that impacts your enrollment, because at the end of the day, that's a big part of it as well.
Oh, it absolutely is. And building off of that example, we had 12 students this year starting our pre-nursing program, which we haven't even built out the lab yet. I mean, we're still in the process of building out the lab. So we've done something similar with a public college right down the road in education because we did not have education. We wanted to be part of the education solution within the state of West Virginia, who desperately needs good teachers. So I think, for leaders who are thinking about strategic partnerships, the question I often get as a consultant or as an executive coach at Terra Firma is, how do we go about that? How do you even begin to explore those possibilities? And it requires you to be vulnerable, and it requires you to cast a net. And I often recommend that presidents and board chairs develop a small group of people that are going to, I like to call it the Alternative Futures Committee, that are going to not think in the normal course of business of what a board and a leadership team often have to think about. They're being charged with thinking differently about the preferred future of the institution. And then that very small group can begin to develop, I actually call it an RFI, a request for inquiry, where they can develop a brief, 7 to 10 page prospectus about the strengths of their institution and the kind of partner they're looking for. And then they, call a list of institutions they think they might want to collaborate with, and they start picking up the phone and sending out their prospectus, and you'd be surprised. It generates conversations. Terra Firma recently participated we do a lot of surveying of the higher education marketplace.
Right.
We recently did an assessment of higher education leaders on who is interested in proactively looking at M&A activity, which of course is the most grandiose of partnerships. And 65% of respondents said they're actively thinking about, considering, or wanting to have conversations around it. But people don't quite know the safe space to do that. So I'm happy to help anybody in that regard who needs some counsel.
Just in case our audience doesn't understand what M&A is, can you explain that for a moment?
Yeah, so mergers and acquisitions, which 20 years ago would have been a tab. It would have been, you might as well say, a 4-letter word at a post-secondary conference. It gets you escorted out of the conference 20 years ago. But
yeah,
today it's something that everybody's talking about. When I go to CIC or other major industry conferences, and if there's sessions on M&A, the rooms tend to be filled because people are very serious, and there's just a lot of vulnerable institutions that these leaders are taking very seriously their responsibility to, in some way, shape, or form, carry on the mission.
Well, let's talk about that as we close out, because I think that there are a lot of vulnerable institutions, and part of the solution, sometimes the only solution boards see, is just raise the tuition rate, and then that just runs things, or it screws up the discount rate, or there's a number of things that happens when you start playing with tuition as opposed to looking at other alternatives, whether it's exploring M&A, whether it's exploring those partnerships. So what other alternative models do you see emerging that could really help these institutions sustain themselves going forward?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I'm not going to suggest I have all the right answers on this, but what I will say is, we all know the truth, that the discount rates at colleges and universities have gone up every year for umpteen years, right? So the marketplace continues to pressure test and question the value of the ROI out of the higher education marketplace. So it is incumbent upon us to illustrate outcomes and demonstrable ROI. I like to say, for liberal arts institutions, which I'm very passionate about, we exist to, yes, teach people how to make a living, but more importantly, teach people how to live life. We don't always articulate the value proposition as well as we should. And so we have to show empirical evidence of outcomes. Qualitative and anecdotal stories are great. You need those. Certain people are going to respond well to those, but a whole other swath are going to they're going to trust but verify. They're going to say, prove it.
Yeah.
So in this instance, this is where, and you and I have, I think, talked about this in the past, Bart, this idea of distinctiveness. I think the head fake that private colleges, many of whom are small, took many years ago when they started feeling the enrollment challenge was they felt a need to be all things to all people. And in so doing, they diluted their distinctiveness. And all of a sudden, they're now trying to run with the, flagship Research One public institute. You can't do that. That's not who you are. You are out-resourced every time you're going to lose. So you have to really focus in. There's this old expression that higher education in the late 20th century was do more with more, right? So this was when everybody was building student centers and residence halls and rock walls and lazy rivers, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then in the early aughts, it became, hey, we need to do more with less. And now we're at a time, and it's very humbling, but it also can be very exciting. And this is hard to hear, but we're at a time where most higher education has to do less with less. And it's a way of saying you have to focus on what's going to be your distinctive mission. Not everything can be your flagpole. You have to pick your North Stars. What is mission-centric and what are you good at? And those are the things you invest in, which means a whole bunch of other things need to go away. And the other thing I would say to specifically answer your question, though, is the cost model of higher education has got to change. Certain schools are trying pricing resets. There's a lot of research on that. Some have done it really well, but the schools that have done it really well have done it well because there's other things associated with pricing resets. Usually they've added new academic programs and they have a highly sophisticated marketing strategy and they're investing in it. The schools that simply do pricing resets to just change it, they lose. They get a 1-year bump and all of a sudden they're in worse shape than they were before that. So you got to be very careful of that. I think partnering with corporations is going to be increasingly important. And when I say partnering with corporations, it's not the whole let's have some internships. It's working with corporations to develop products, develop curriculum, to develop majors, and then having those corporations invest and underwrite the cost of instruction and help give you essentially startup capital. And then frankly, to help fund the students who matriculate into those programs, who will then have to give back by giving years of service back to that corporation. I think that's a whole new model that needs to emerge that will mitigate the costs on families, ensure the colleges are listening to the labor market and collaborating, and drive revenue to the institutions in a unique and important way from the entities that have it, these large corporations.
Yeah, love that. Good stuff.
Dr. Caridi, what's one final piece of advice that you'd offer to higher ed leaders who are facing disruption but want to position their institution for long-term renewal?
I would say demand excellence out of yourself and your leadership teams, but do not demand perfection. What I have found when I coach others and consult with other entities, because there are so many constituencies in the higher education marketplace, and frankly, leaders are a little battle-worn. Mm-hmm. And when they become battle-worn, they tend to go with the lowest common denominator of that which will upset the least amount of people. And when you do that, you are taking the head fake and you're probably going to make a bad decision. Leaders tend to be overly scrupulous in this very disruptive time. And there's a line I recently heard, and I love it. I wish I came up with it. And it's this: never has higher education moved this fast, and never, ever again will it move this slowly. Mm. So recognizing that leaders have to make data-driven decisions, but they have to do it in an accelerated way. They can't be overly scrupulous. They will make some mistakes along the way. They just have to win more than they lose. And they have to have fortitude and confidence, and they have to have alignment and empowerment from their boards as well. So that's what I would tell those leaders that are listening today.
Thank you. Dr. Jamie Caridi, Interim President of Bethany College and President of Terra Firma Consulting Services. Dr. Caridi, what's the best way or the best place someone can reach out to you and connect if they would like to have further conversations with you?
You can reach me in two different ways. You can certainly check out Bethany College in West Virginia and just shoot me an email through my Bethany College email address, or go to Terra Firma Consulting and just find us on the web, and we'd be happy to have a conversation with you about helping make you and your institution the best version of itself.
Well, thank you for providing all the wonderful information and wisdom for our higher ed leaders. Bart, do you have any final thoughts?
I do, and thank you, Troy. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate it, Jamie. And it's been one of those that reminds me of several several conversations I had recently with just the idea of having courageous leadership. I think that's one of the areas that whether you're a leader on a higher ed marketing team or you're a leader on your, kids baseball team, I don't care, but leadership takes courage these days, especially in higher education. And I think that your point about you're not gonna have a win-win all the time. Some people are not going to like what you do, and that's okay. Because I think leadership doesn't necessarily mean that it's a popularity contest. It means being courageous to do the thing that you know is right. And so I think that that's something that I would encourage a lot of the leaders listening to this podcast, is that take some time to really think about your institution, what's going on, what impact you can make, and the types of things that need to be done. Vet that, get some data-driven decisions going, but be courageous with that and recognize that it's going to be hard, but sometimes getting through that hard time is going to be worth it. And I think that a lot of what we talked about today kind of illustrates that well. So, Jamie, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you, my friend, and really appreciate you being on today.
And to our audience, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast. If you found this conversation helpful, please be sure to share it with a colleague and follow us on LinkedIn at the Higher Ed Marketer. The podcast is brought to you by Kaler Solutions, your trusted partner in higher ed branding, enrollment strategy, and mission fit marketing. We'll see you next week with another great guest.
The Higher Ed Marketer Podcast is proud to be a part of the Higher Ed Marketer Podcast Network. Discover even more conversations, resources, and tools to help you grow your institution at thehigheredmarketer.com, your go-to community for all things higher ed marketing and leadership.